Welcome back, listeners, to Shooting Rabbits in a Barrel, a podcast brought to you by Scarecrow Consultants. You will notice today I'm joined by somebody entirely different. Nathan, our first guest star. Hello, how are you?
Hello, Jess. I'm good, thanks. How are you today?
Good. Yeah, I'm well. It's hot. It's too hot to function, but I'm good.
Too hot indeed.
It is. So Nathan, you and I know each other from the In Cozy UK Early Careers Forum.
That's right.
Yeah, and where you are the chair, correct? Yeah.
Indeed, I am for another 6 months.
Oh wow. Oh, only six
No,
months. Oh,
we're three quarters through.
gosh, time flies.
Time
Wow.
flies.
So you must have some exciting stories and lessons, having met lots of different people from across the systems engineering profession and been to the annual systems engineering conference within Cozy UK lots of times. So I'm looking forward to hearing your story. Okay, so as you're new, but you knew this anyway. And for our listeners, just to remind everybody one more time, we ask everybody two questions on shooting rabbits. First one is, what story would you like to share with us today? And the second one is, what valuable lesson did you learn? So, Nathan, what story would you like to share with us today?
I would like to share a story from the first ever project that I worked on, fresh out of university, right onto a grad scheme, where I made a rather fatal error that was at least quite amusing, but definitely one that I learned from. Um, have you ever used IBM Rational Doors?
Oh, I have, yes. Mm,
Yes.
mm.
Um, for those who might not know, DOORS is an acronym, or rather a backronym, um, Dynamic Object Oriented Requirements System, I believe is what it stands for. I remember someone saying to me that it was just IBM getting back at Windows, and just, yeah, shoehorning in a backronym. Um, but DOORS is a pretty famous or infamous a piece of software in the systems engineering world because it's effectively a requirements management tool. It's effectively a database that you can input requirements, and you can sort of put them in different modules. So you can have like a system requirements document, a user requirements document, a test case document, and then you can sort of link between them. And it's got a few things going for it, like every time that you create an object, as they call it, a requirement, a new line item, that it gets like a unique ID assigned to it, and that is like unique until time ends. If you delete it, that requirement doesn't actually get deleted; it just gets hidden, and that ID is preserved. Reason I'm going through that functionality is that it is important to the fatal error that I made.
Okay, take a note.
But Doors is quite from my perspective, not massively user friendly, or at least it's not it doesn't present itself like a lot of MS365 or Office applications. And so if you're used to dealing with that, like I was, having been a uni student, it's not immediately apparent what you can do with it. Which, when your first project, you're tasked with sort of managing an existing requirement set and sort of updating, deleting, creating requirements, is a bit of a daunting task. And so I sort of had to learn a trial by fire how to use this piece of software, which there isn't a whole lot of guidance out there on.
Mm.
It's a lot of stuff you can kind of get by in Word or Excel or similar things, but it's looking up, and people have undoubtedly had the same issues. Not so much with Doors. There was thankfully someone who I'd taken over from had made some video tutorials
Oh,
that were
nice.
internal to the company, which were great, really, really helpful because it was a practical way of seeing how you might use it. Only problem is they didn't cover everything, which is fair enough when you've been tasked to make video tutorials. It's a lot of time and effort you got to put in. You're not going to get everything, and you know it's not a very modular way. You can't really sort of tack on a bit to the end of a video very easily. I don't know, maybe you can. I'm not a software whiz for video editing. Maybe you are, Jess. Um, you run a podcast.
Well, yeah. Talking about trial by fire, like, yeah.
Yeah, no, relatable. But yeah, so that helped me kind of get my feet off the ground. But one of the things that I had to do is that we were doing the requirements in doors, and we were doing the architecture for the project in Spark's Enterprise Architect. And one of the sort of processes that I had to sort of help contribute the requirement side to was what we called a doors Spark's coherence loop, which was basically because all the changes to the requirements got made in doors, and basically every week we would effectively send over a package of an export of doors in such a way that it could be interpreted by Sparks and put in there so that all of the requirement sort of boxes that they've got in the architecture model of the system would all be updated, new ones would be created, ones would be deleted. So it was all about sort of maintaining that sort of coherence between the two softwares. This process was horrible. It was like an incredibly inefficient sort of manual process that over my 8 months on the project I worked to try and automate as much of it as possible. And it sort of involved some weird things indoors, like when you want to use drop down fields indoors, when you then export that to a CSV, it's sort of if you then want to make any changes and put it back in, it won't work. Because if you have like a drop down that's like yes or no, and you have another field that is like free text where you might type in yes or no, the CSV won't look the same because the free text will say yes or no, and the drop down will actually have a leading apostrophe in front of it. Problem is that when you're looking at your Excel CSV, your Excel file, you don't actually see the apostrophe unless you click on the cell. It's sort of hidden by default, which is the right pain for diagnosing things. But I then worked out that if I wanted to, import stuff back in as part of this coherency loop, I needed to put leading apostrophes in front of any columns that had drop downs or enumerations, as they're called. So I then looked at how do I apply automatically a bunch of leading apostrophes to a set of data, and I found some sort of I think it was VBA code that you could run that would do that. What I accidentally did was, instead of applying it to all of the data that was in that column, I applied it to the entire column. And a lot of the time that's not a problem, but when you're changing stuff, when you're adding something, basically that code added a leading apostrophe to every single cell in that column, of which an Excel worksheet goes down thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of rows. So when I then re-imported this file into Excel, I noticed that Doors was suddenly behaving a lot slower. It was taking a lot longer than I would expected to import this file. Doors then crashed, and I was like, huh, that's strange. I mean, not the strangest thing to happen to that piece of software, but not great during an upload. I then go in and I see that, oh, okay, all the data has changed that I expected to. But when I then tried to create a new requirement, I noticed that the requirement ID, so I mentioned earlier that when you delete something indoors, it's not truly deleted, it's hidden, and its ID is preserved. And so if you were to order a requirement set from the lowest ID to the highest ID, you'd start with maybe SR001, if that was still in the data set, and you would end with maybe SR4000. There weren't 4,000 requirements because we deleted some over time. There were maybe 2,000. I created a new requirement and it came up as SR 16,500 and something. Because what had happened is Doors had recognized this data import. It had recognized all of the leading apostrophes that I couldn't see in the import file because they were leading apostrophes, so they're not visible unless you click on the cell. It had recognized those as new requirements. So it had made several thousand new requirements with nothing in them apart from a single column having an apostrophe in it, and then in crashing had deleted them all, which then meant that those requirement IDs were forever used up. And whilst that's not a colossal issue, it doesn't engender the best faith from your customer if you deliver a requirement set and the requirements start with the SR 16,000. They're like, good gracious, how many requirements have you delivered here?
Yeah, good lord.
what have we paid you for? and reasonable thing to say. And we tried a lot of things to try and fix this. A lot. We tried to see if there were ways to actually properly delete requirement IDs. We couldn't find a way to do that, which is probably a good thing. We tried rolling back to a previous, because we sort of baselined the database every time we did one of these coherence loops. We did it every week. And whilst that was useful for being able to say what the difference was between each baseline, you could sort of measure that as in like 16 of requirements had been made, 3 had been deleted, whatever. We couldn't actually roll back to a previous one, which was a bit of a light bulb moment because that's why we'd been making them. We thought we could roll back, but it apparently wasn't possible for whatever reason. So unfortunately, this meant that we had to remake a new requirements module. So
no.
we had to port over all the requirements to a new one, which doesn't sound so bad, but you have to port them over. You can't just copy and paste because you need to preserve their IDs. So you need to not just put in your 2000 requirements, you need to put in spaces between them so that it creates all the ones that were deleted. Yeah. And then you also need to preserve all the links that those SRs had with user requirements and tests and stuff. So it was quite a bit of work. And one of the particularly unfortunate things is my mistake was made a day before I went on a training course, a several-day training course. So 2 of my colleagues had to work to correct this, who were quite naturally not best pleased with this. The one saving grace is that during my training course, I get a message from this one colleague saying, you know, oh, it's going well, we found a way through this. 10 minutes later, he says, Nathan, I've just done the error again. And so he did the exact same mistake as me. No. And so they had to trash that new database that they'd just built and make a new one. Which obviously, whilst terrible for them, made me feel an awful lot better about at least it's not just me. Yeah. So that was, an enlightening experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yikes. Well, like you say, early career, like these things happen. You're, first few months on the job. Wow. Okay. So from that, what valuable lesson did you learn, Nathan?
I just don't think I really learned anything from that. Yeah, I just kept doing it. No, I learned a very valuable lesson, lessons from that. The first one was the value in checking your work. I think I hadn't really appreciated the gravity of what damage you can do when you import to a data set and you're overwriting things. Is that we had all assumed that there was a safety net of being able to roll back to a previous baseline. I think my understanding is that in some cases you can, but I think the type of license that we had or the way that the backend server was being stored at the company was such a way where it either wasn't possible or would have required an awful lot of effort from our IT department. So I suppose it was misplaced faith in a safety net that then led to complacency around thinking, oh, it's okay if an import goes wrong. So I learned the value in double checking that a safety net is real. I learned the value of checking my own work and understanding when something can actually make significant error. But I also learned the value in, I sort of brought up those tutorials earlier that I was reading to, get a grip on doors. I sort of learned the value in having a more comprehensive set of resources there, because it was a bit of a running theme that not just on that project, but in future ones. And it's been a running theme through most of my career so far, is the fact that as a consultant where I get to work on new projects relatively frequently, every few months or so, there can be a bit of a disconnect in the systems engineering between projects, and it can often feel like you're starting from scratch each time. And I was very aware that when I came off of that project, which wasn't me getting fired, thankfully, that if someone was going to take over from me, they also probably wouldn't know how to use that software and they'd need schooling in it. So I worked with an SME who had a lot of experience with the tool to come up with some PowerPoint slides that went through different use cases of the tool. So things like, how do you deal with drop-down lists and re-importing values from them? How do you make sure that that doesn't break your database? All those sorts of things. So it was more specific, tailored use cases, and you could kind of like add in new slides quite easily. And whilst not necessarily as engaging as a video, it was a bit more easy to distribute, a bit more modular, and a bit easier to tailor to specific use cases. And so yeah, that's then really stuck with me, is the fact that when you come to the end of a project, it's really tempting to just be like, great, finally we've got that done. We can close the book there and just move on to the next one. And there's so much value in being like, hang on, what did we learn from this? What went well? What didn't go well? And what kind of processes did we implement that meant that this was a success? Something where I'm on a project now where we've had loads of those learnings, and it's been a real constant thing that we're like, yeah, we really want to make sure that the next project we learn from this and that we approach things differently. And there's a lot of value in basically then being able to formalize some of the processes in your organization, in your systems engineering team, to say, when you start a project, you start doing this kind of thing, you consider this earlier than we did, you start thinking about this, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because as systems engineers, our job really is to record the decisions, the assumptions, the changes, like all the way through a project, to kind of, so somebody could look at it and they could see a coherent story all the way through, and, you know, working on traceability with requirements, this is how we got to this point. But like you say, I think lots of people, it would resonate with them that you finish a project and then everybody goes, oh, well, that was good. Okay, well, see ya. But it is so important even after, you know, talking about a full life cycle of the system, like also taking full life cycle view of the system, taking full life cycle view of the project, and the disposal decommissioning is like, okay, and what did we learn for next time when we do this project? So you actually already touched on that you've already seen, or you've been applying these lessons in other projects, in the projects that you're working on now. Can you see real benefits already from applying that lesson? And if you can, what's the most tangible benefit, or what do you think will be the most tangible benefit from that?
I think one of the most tangible benefits is, it's not one that I've yet been able to apply, because I didn't get to use doors on a follow-up project, for example, and that project sort of ended when I left. So the intent and what I think is the main benefit, at least for that kind of thing with tutorials, is I think I found that as a new graduate starting, I felt like the amount of time it took for me to start actually adding like what I perceived as good value to the project and to the business, it felt like quite a long time, because there was such a sort of like spooling up phase of like trying to be like, okay, how does this software work? How do I use it? And you sort of go from a point of not really feeling like you're able to contribute much, then sort of contributing the as is, the expectation, and then feeling confident enough to be able to start doing more and like actually add your own spin on things, start adding more value. And the intent behind trying to capture like processes and best practices and stuff is to try and reduce that time frame, so that if you get someone who's brand new onto a project, they can be onboarded a lot quicker. And I had that on a recent project where I came in onto the project and they had an onboarding pack ready to go, which had like, this is what the high level design is, this is what the security documentation is, here's where we're at with this and that. And it was just a pack of documents that you could just read through, because often when you start on a project for the first week or so, there's just not a whole lot to do because people are working out what to do with you. And it helps with that sort of dead time if you can actually start getting up to speed on things.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And then we can, get cracking, doing great systems engineering work.
Exactly.
Straight off the mark. Yeah. Cool. Nathan, thank you so much for coming in and for sharing your sort of almost like nail-biting, cringe early career moment. We've all had one. Every single one of us, I guarantee, has had one. I'm sure more will come out in the life of this podcast. But thank you so much for sharing your story and your lessons. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. We'll see you again soon. If you want to be a guest on this podcast, exactly how Nathan has done, and share your stories, you can contact us at rabbit@scarecrowconsultants.co.uk. But until next time, thank you so much. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks for having me, Jess. Bye.
Thanks, Nathan. Bye.